Well, I grew up in a blue-collar union family. My father was a railroad worker. My mother was a nurse. We didn't have very much, but we did have a lot of values. My dad taught me the value of a hard day's work, getting things done, and that's what really helped me. He lost his job when I was 8 years old, so we had to figure out ways to make ends meet. My mother, thank goodness she was working, was able to help, but she'll tell you that from that day on, I was always looking for work, was always looking for ways so that I would have money too, and that's really helped me learn the value of a hard day's work. But I appreciate that background. Again, what I was taught, that just because you start in a position doesn't mean you have to end in that position either. And I'm actually I look at myself and think, here's a guy who started with nothing, who lived the American dream, and I think that's so important, and we need to make sure that's available for everybody here in this country. Well, in Pennsylvania, you either went to the coal mines or the steel mills. My mother pushed me and pushed me and pushed me to go to college, but I had to work to go to college, so I ended up working in as a mechanic. I worked on a road crew. I even drove truck during those periods of time to just pay the way through. Then I ended up getting my degree in business, became a CPA because I knew that was my way out of actually that area. And then I always dreamed of coming to Ohio because we had family here in Newark, and I used to just think Ohio was such a land of opportunity. And that's what I did. I ended up moving to Ohio when I was 24 years old, started my first business. I was engaged to be married at that time. My wife, we got married October, 7 or 8 months later, she joined me. And I'm happy to say that this year we'll be celebrating 34 years of marriage. But that's how I started. I started in the business world. One business turned into 2, turned into 5, turned into 10. And over the next 28 years, I owned and operated over 60 businesses, created over 1,500 jobs, and employed 3,000 people. During that period of time, I was always willing to give back too, because I believed in that. I was a firefighter. I was a baseball coach in my hometown. And I volunteered on the planning commission. I volunteered on the board of zoning appeals. At one point in time, our city was struggling a little bit. I also was asked by the business community to run for office, and I agreed to do that, only on the commitment that when I balanced the budget, I would leave, which is what I really believe anyone that gets into public service should do. So it took me 8 years. We were able to take a $1.5 million deficit to a surplus, and then I walked away from that, knowing that I had given a lot back to my city, including as a firefighter and on all these volunteer positions. At the same time, though, when I left there, I had this one business, which out of my many businesses was a Chevy dealership, and that's what really got me to Washington, because I had now spent 5 or 6 years taking a General Motors dealership that was in trouble, turning it around as well. And it was a terrible situation when when the federal government stepped in, took over General Motors, and then I found out that my dealership, even though I was told by General Motors, you have nothing to worry about, you've been a good soldier, you've turned this business around, but I really felt sorry for the 53 employees more than anything else, because I received one of those letters that said, you are no longer going to be part of the General Motors family. I tell people that's like getting kicked in the stomach. It's a terrible feeling to realize something's being taken away from you by the federal government. I contacted my congressman at the time, and he told me he would help. I only learned that when the vote came for me to have my dealership reinstated, he voted against it. And that was another turning point for me, where I said, you know what, if this is the way Congress is going to be, I'm going to remove him from that office, even if I have to run. And a year prior to that, I had no intentions of even thinking about running for Congress. But that was the decision I made, and I've now been there for 6.5 years. But I've enjoyed my business career for almost 3 decades. I still have businesses that I operate from afar. In Congress, you're not allowed to really be a hands-on operator. So I've been involved in businesses now since I've been in Ohio for 34 years, and I continue to be involved. Still do my own personal tax return, still do my own business tax returns, and still get involved even from that standpoint. Well, what I found in Washington was, look, my 6 years in Washington were great. I've learned so much. But what I have learned is that in Washington you play defense. I'm an offensive guy. I'm somebody who has spent all my life doing good things, changing big things, making a difference. In Washington, you just sit back and make sure things don't happen, which is a problem for me. So what I started to see, well, there's a problem here. And what it really comes down to is we have career politicians in Washington that continue to always make their decisions based on the next election. And I saw it even in my first election, when we were told, you can't do this, you can't do that, you got to protect your seat. That's ridiculous. So what I realized was Washington, I don't want to play defense anymore. I want to come back to this state that has done so much for me. And what I found when I looked at Ohio, realizing Ohio can't wait any longer, because we are running deficits in the federal government. And in Ohio, 50% of our budget is based on monies coming from the federal government. So think about that trajectory. You have Ohio that needs 50% of its budget from the federal government, and then you have the federal government, 35% deficits are being funded by China. We have a serious problem here, and I started to realize that we have another problem in Ohio, which is the career politicians have taken us down a path, which again, we have the same issues we have in Washington. We're not making the right decisions. When we have a state that we're in the top 10 most left, when I say left, that's not political, that's leaving. People are leaving this state. We're losing population. We have, when we've gone since 2011 from 21st to 37th in job creation, that's not a good sign. As I said, when 50% of your budget is based on federal dollars, that's not a good sign. When the state's the #1 state for college debt, that's not a good sign. When the state's the #1 state for dependency on Medicaid, that's not a good sign. And when the state has 1 out of 4 people on Medicaid, that's not a good sign. All the signs show that we're going in the wrong direction. And what I saw was 3 people, at least on the Republican side, but I also think on the Democrat side, they're all career politicians that have all made their decisions based on next elections and not made their decisions based on the next generation. So I decided to jump in the race. I don't think we can continue down a path. I see what's going on in Washington. Career politicians stop too much from happening. I don't think we can let this happen in Ohio, especially since Ohio's been so good to me. Well, statistically, we have a lot of bad statistics, including being 50th in entrepreneurship. But I think the answer is you got to put a governor. You got to have a governor who's willing to make some tough decisions. Number one, we got to look at what we're spending. We're spending way too much money. Our revenues are declining. So as governor, the first thing I would do is freeze expenses for at least 4 years. At the same time, we got to look at helping our businesses here. The reason why people don't want to grow and prosper here is our current businesses can't grow or prosper here. In fact, a lot of them are leaving. So we have a tax problem. We have a very complicated tax situation. We have the regulatory issues that are driving people out. We have the electricity costs that aren't stable anymore. So these are all things that are driving businesses out. And then we have a workforce that we don't have enough people trained to fill the jobs that are here. And that's another reason why businesses are leaving. So I think the other answer is, not only do you need a business leader who can change things, fresh ideas, fresh leadership. All the career politicians that I'm running against have had their chance. They've been everything from Speaker of the House, Lieutenant Governor. They've had their chance. And now it's time for some fresh leadership. Somebody who has actually created a job, somebody who has actually balanced a budget, somebody who's actually signed the front of the paycheck, not the back of the paycheck, to lead. And it's got to be leading by looking at things and changes we have to make. The other thing I would tell you in education, we have taken our state to an education system, and this is about filling up these jobs, where everybody is funneled into a single core, which is everybody has to go to college. And then we reward K through 12 based on test sets, not skill sets. I want to open that up starting in 6th grade. I want to bring VOTEC back into the high schools. Now somebody said to me, well, you realize that's expensive to bring it back in? Well, look how expensive it's been by taking it out. Because now we have a workforce that's not trained. We have a workforce that feels rejected and feels like they can't do what's necessary to go to college. Some of them turn to drugs, which is one of the reasons we're the #1 state for opioid overdose and addiction. So we have to look at opening that up and making sure that we're driving our economy, but giving our future, our children and grandchildren, that opportunity to say, you know what, I can make it here. I can live the American dream, being a plumber, I always use my friend. He's a plumber that got his plumbing certificate, started his own plumbing company, then started his own construction company. Today he owns a house and a boat in Florida, and he sold the construction company. So these are things that can happen here. It doesn't all have to be directed toward college. So I think those are the issues that we have to look at. We can't keep doing it with stale career politicians that we have today. And again, it's part of our political world. We have politicians, I call one of them Dishonest John, who say he was not part of Common Core. But let's face it, he actually, as a senator, pushed for Common Core and took one of the federal dollars. And I don't know how he can today say, look, I didn't do that. He did it. So we brought this stuff in. We have to get rid of it. I'm a big believer that we have to push as much back to the local area as we can. We have to push as much back to the local school districts. But at the same time, we got to look at some of the other states and what they're doing. I love what Wisconsin's trying to do. They're putting all their funding back into the local jurisdictions. There's nothing wrong with looking at the other states. That's really what America was all about. What are working in other states? What's not working here? And I think education has to be that. I also think we have an issue with education where we have fewer children being born in this state, and most of them are leaving. But those that are staying, there's still the same amount of colleges that there were 15 or 20 years ago. So we don't have enough students coming through the system in Ohio to fill our colleges. And what we really have to do is become more efficient with the colleges we have. We may have to share some professors, but we're going to have to do something. If we have a professor that teaches really well in one area, we may have to share them between some of the public schools, because that's the only way to make sure that these universities, especially public universities, can still survive and grow and move forward. Well, my plan it's the same as it is in Washington. We have to do in all of the above, but we also have to use the assets that we have. And because this is an energy rich state with gas and potential oil reserves, we should use those. We should use those to their benefit. That's what we have here in this state. We should make sure that those are assets and we use them. The severance tax would be gone in my administration. I want to get these businesses growing. Do I want them to pay taxes? Absolutely. But I'm not going to tax them before they ever get started, because they won't come. So we have to get that off the table and start working with these companies so that they're growing jobs, and at the same time they're using those assets to bring our utility costs down. We should be able to compete with Texas. We have the resources to compete with Texas, and we should be doing that. We can't be scaring companies away when we have the assets to be able to use. And again, whether it's wind and solar, we should do those as well. But let's face it, wind and solar are not going to be as strong here as they may be in Arizona or in California. But over there, they don't have the natural reserves we have. So they should use their assets, we should use ours. What's interesting is I saw this the idea that political career politicians are what's causing us the problem in Washington. So I actually jumped in and supported Donald Trump prior to the primary in Ohio, which most people said was dangerous, but what I said was, look, it's the right thing to do. We can't have career politicians going back to Washington. So I was supportive of him all the way through. He knows that. It's kind of interesting. I go back to the convention when all the Ohio delegation was sitting down while nominee Trump was standing giving a speech. I was actually sitting in the Trump family seats. So that's a big difference between me and the other three candidates as well. They may talk and say, I was supportive of Trump, or I really was supportive of Trump, just didn't want to come out. That's not the type of governor you want to have. And the other three opponents that I'm running against, all the way up to November, were making statements they weren't supportive, they weren't going to vote for him. And there's videos of that, so it's not like this is being made up for them to say it. But I've stuck with him all the way through, and he knows that. I've supported his issues. I think we need to move forward. I've been in the Oval Office multiple times. I had Vice President Mike Pence fly out to Cleveland, and he and I flew out on Air Force Two, where he said I've been with Jim Renacci since before it was cool to be with Jim Renacci, which was a nice comment. I had Corey Lewandowski come out and do a event for me and support me. So the president knows me, the president knows I'm running, and the president, I hope, does eventually come out but in support of me, but I know that he does. I know that he supports businessmen. That's what Corey Lewandowski said. He said, look, whether he comes out or not publicly, we all know that he supports business people, he doesn't support career politicians, and he wants to get something done. And I know that he has told me that the other three candidates on the Republican side did not support him, and he remembers that. So in the end, we'll see which direction he takes, but I do see myself as a friend of the administration, and hope to continue to work through to get some of these issues solved that he ran on and was elected on. Well, I'm a lifelong Catholic, but I also believe in religious freedoms, and I've done that. I've supported that. I've even been questioned on some of my votes because of if there's a religious freedom ability where I can add that into any piece of legislation, I'm going to put it in there, because I do believe that we have to have that First Amendment right and that freedom, but that also includes religious, religious freedoms and religious rights. And so I'm going to continue to vote my conscience on that, making sure that we always work toward protecting the First Amendment, but also to work toward protecting the religious freedoms that should be available to all of us. I just think in the end, what's important is that Ohio has the opportunity to be that state where it is the land of opportunity for everyone, and gives everybody the ability to live the American dream like I did. I want to make sure that when people come to this state, or they're born in this state, or they're raised in their state, they say, you know what, I can make it just like he did, which I think is so important. I think if we just continue down this path with continue to have career politicians making decisions based on their next election, which the three that I'm running against have done for 70 plus years, we're going to have the same issues and the same problems. And they can't say they're going to change the status quo. They are the status quo. And I'm hoping that your viewers and people that read or listen to this actually take a look at what they've done. I mean, one of the reasons why I jumped into this race is I've looked at what all three of my opponents have done. I've seen that, as I call Dishonest John, he's the one who did Common Core. He was supportive of that. I've seen that he's raised his expenses in the Secretary of State's office. I've seen that we now have an Attorney General who, let's face it, we're #1 in opioid overdose and addiction, but yet he's the #1 law officer in the state. So what's the difference between him moving to governor? Or what's the difference between, this is all issues with career politicians. I think if your listeners or your readers are unhappy with the direction this state's going, I hope they look to someone with fresh ideas and someone that's really lived their life in the business world but served at the same time. And again, my experience in Washington have only helped me to realize career politicians are the problem there. They're the same problem here.